Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Can Journal Club. Today we have a very exciting guest. This is Lex Helger from White Whale Creations. He has a background in biochemistry and writes about the science of psychoactives. He's written 3 graphic novels about the endocannabinoid system based on Moby Dick, highly recommended reading, and hosts the Lex Files podcast about spirituality and psychoactives. You can follow him on Twitter or join his weekly cannabinoid science letter entitled Cannabinoids and the People. Today he's going to be talking about glutamate, GABA, and the Ouroboros of the cannabinoids. I'm very personally excited about this because I'm a neuroscience geek, and I think discovering more about the interplay between the endocannabinoid system and the signaling and how it works with the normal neurotransmitters that our body makes, it's going to be very interesting. So go ahead and take it from here, Lex.
All right, great. Thanks so much. And thank you for the invitation. Hello to everyone out there. I hopefully we won't get interrupted. The kids are going to bed. We'll see how that goes. So yes, I'm Lex Pelger, and I am fascinated by cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. And I chose this topic about glutamate and GABA because they are the green light and the red light of the brain. They're really important, and they're part of the reason that the endocannabinoid system works. And so I have to begin by thanking the anonymous Italian citizen who made this PowerPoint theme, because I needed something red and green for red light, for stoplight, go light. And there was nothing except this Italian American Heritage Month theme that this person came up with. And it was perfect and exactly what I needed. So thanks goes out to them, because this is the green light, red light of the brain. And this, you hear about the sexy neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin a lot more than you do about glutamate and GABA. But glutamate is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So basically, when you need a neuron to ramp up or to slow down, these are the two that you use. That makes them so important. Some of the other ones can be more specialized, but these are kind of bedrocks to what makes the brain work. And so just to give a little bit of background on them before we talk about how the endocannabinoid system works with them, and then end with some of the medical applications that would come out of this. So glutamate actually was a latecomer to us knowing it was a neurotransmitter, because it's also an amino acid. And it's of all the amino acids that we eat, glutamate is the most common amino acid in the human diet. And so that's why it took until I think the 50s for us to realize, and really for people to be sure in the 70s, because how could this thing we eat be incredibly important in the brain? But it turns out to be true. The reason that your diet of glutamate doesn't affect things so much is because of your blood-brain barrier, and it weeds out the glutamate, because the level of glutamate in your blood would be very, very toxic to your brain. So it's one important reason to have a good blood-brain barrier. And so the one problem with glutamate is that if you get too much of it, like in epilepsy, then you get this surge that causes overexcitation, an over neural firing that is like an engine running with no oil in it. And it's obviously bad for the brain, especially the longer it goes on. One theory of schizophrenia is that it's actually dysfunction of the glutamate system. People usually think about the dopamine system there, but it's a rising theory. And with how the cannabinoids interact with schizophrenia, that makes a lot of sense. It's complex, but potentially helpful. And so then there is GABA. And this is such an important one because it calms the brain, and it's the brain's basic negative feedback loop. And that who says it, that in the last century, the most important scientific concept of the last century was the negative feedback loop, and the idea that you need to calm things down. And so GABA helps to rein in that excitotoxicity. And excitotoxicity is a big problem in a lot of the diseases that we fight against. The major neurodegenerative diseases, all of them, ALS, MS, Parkinson's, they involve excitotoxicity, too much glutamate. Epilepsy, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, alcohol use disorder very much messes up your glutamate, and the rapid withdrawal from benzodiazepines. And that is a deadly withdrawal. That in a lot of ways is a worse withdrawal than from opiates. And so that is, and part of that comes from the excitotoxicity, stuff word. So anyway, how does GABA work? This is worth explaining just because it also goes over a little bit of how neurochemistry works in general, just in case for the people that this isn't repetitive for. But GABA works via something called an interneuron. And instead of, let's see, can I get, don't they have little laser pointers here? There we go. Now we're rocking and rolling. So the general theory, for instance, Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was a great artist who drew neurons and first guessed at how they worked. The basic theory is that direction flows in one direction, that you have the inputs coming into this neuron, and eventually it gets so many inputs, it tells it to fire, it passes its inputs down, it passes the electricity down to here, and then this is the synaptic cleft where it releases the neurotransmitters. And so there was a fight for a lot of the history for a long time about whether the brain is one mass or whether it's a bunch of little neurons. And Golgi and Ramon y Cajal won the Nobel Prize the same year, and they had the opposite theories about what was true. Golgi thought that it was just one big mass all connected, and Santiago Ramon y Cajal, because he was such a careful artist and stainer, realized that it was a bunch of different little cells in there. And so Golgi took the opportunity of that lecture to push back against his opponent's argument, which was kind of seen as poor sport, especially because he turned out to be wrong. But anyway, that's how it works. The electricity starts from here, goes to here, releases the neurotransmitter, and that affects the one upstream, and eventually it'll trigger and affect and so on. What interneurons do when they get a stimulation of some kind, usually want to say calming things or exciting, it goes here and it alters what's happening here. It releases something that's going to either ramp up or tamp down this connection. And especially GABA is gonna be the thing that makes this cycle lesser, that slows it down. And so that's how GABA works. Another important question though is, where does GABA live? And so to go forward with my template email here. So the mainland of Italy is a long peninsula that resembles a tall boot, so much so that it's often referred to as the boot. And now I'm supposed to insert a map of Italy to highlight its location. So this is the location of the CB1 receptors. And you can see this. I couldn't find a great staining of CB1 and GABA on top of each other. But in these different cell types in the hippocampus, the memory area of the brain, you can see that the cannabinoid receptors and the GABA receptors are in the same location. CB1 helps to have these GABA interneurons work. And the most important part about this is that the CB1 receptors, for a quick primer on the basics of the endocannabinoid system, the first ever discovered receptor was CB1, and that's the one responsible for THC making you high. It's one of the most widespread receptors in the human brain, and it speaks to how important the endocannabinoid system is. The CB2 receptor was a second one discovered, and while it's at low levels in the brain, and it's usually there for responding to neural insults and problems, but the CB2 receptor is on every organ of the body and seems to be very much tied up with the immune system and inflammation, which is part of the reason that the endocannabinoid system can heal in so many different areas, because the CB2 receptor reaches that area. And so the CB1 receptor, the fascinating part about it is, do you know where the most CB1 receptors are located by far in the human brain? There are many different cell types, but the very most of them is on the interneurons that release GABA. So that means, just to go back to this one, that means the majority of these are where CB1 is saying to this system, slow down. That's what's so important about it. And you can see it as a small microcircuit is what the interneurons are doing. They would sit at the spot where you have your sensory inputs coming in from outside your body, and the reflexes and responses and higher level mental processes are going to go out. Where that information is getting processed is a large series of microcircuits. That's basically what we're running on. And in those microcircuits, the dial it down button dial is GABA. And what's controlling these GABA interneurons is CB1. This speaks to why the endocannabinoid system is so amazing for neuroprotection. And all of these different diseases and all of these accidental insults that happen all of a sudden, the endocannabinoid system is amazing at protecting the brain. And probably a lot of it is because it has this ability through GABA to have the entire brain calm down, not overexcite about whatever's going on. And so, and I just wanted to put this picture in here to show kind of the basics of interneurons coming in. Here you would have a gluta one coming in. Here you'd have a GABA one coming in. This one would make it excite more. This one would inhibit it more. And so all over your brain, this is happening all the time. And CB1 is working with both of these, which is a fascinating part. I think the best way to describe this is that old joke from Stephen Wright, one of the great comedians, who still hasn't been involved in a scandal, which is pretty good. But he said that what he likes to do is buy a humidifier and a dehumidifier and put them in the same room and let them fight it out. And that is exactly what the endocannabinoid system is doing in the brain. It has these dials and it's ramping it up a little bit. It's ramping it down a little bit. It's homeostasis, it's a balance. And to call the endocannabinoid system the balance system of the body, this is why. And balance is such an important part of health. It's something that we learn more and more as we're kind of joining Western medicine to more ancient traditions, is that both of them are coming to balance being the key. And the endocannabinoid system is great at balance. Just a little bit more neurochemistry is that this glutamate CB2 heterocomplex. So this one sounds complicated, but it's just an interesting nuance that I think is worth mentioning because it's very important in how the endocannabinoid system works in general. A heterocomplex, if you have these two different receptors on your cell, a heterocomplex is when they come together and do something differently than they did by themselves. And so this is interesting for one, because this is a fairly new idea. I don't think it's even 20 years that we've known that these receptors can entangle, and it happens on all different types of receptors. CB1 can form a homocomplex with itself. Two CB1s do something different than two of them by themselves. And here you can see the importance of the endocannabinoid system is it actually links up with the glutamate to make a heterocomplex. Silence that. And so this is a really important part of what's going on. The endocannabinoid system receptors form heterocomplexes with a lot of different other receptor types that are important ones: serotonin, dopamine, endorphin, really important transmitting systems that are more known because they were discovered earlier. The reason that we're behind on the endocannabinoid system discoveries and knowledge, and that we only cracked the code in 1991 about anandamide and 2-AG being endocannabinoid neurotransmitters, is because the endocannabinoids are fats. They're lipids. A lot of the other ones are proteins or things that are easier, that are water soluble, that are easier to study in test tube. Fats are not easy to study. And for a long time, they were considered a backwater of biology. And now they're coming to their heyday because, yes, your brain eats fats and it's really important to have good fat levels, but that's not all it does with fats. Just like the amino acid glutamate turns out to be a neurotransmitter, these fatty lipids are also incredibly sensitive and delicate controls that neurons can use to talk to each other. They can sense very, very small shifts in the wind of lipid levels and respond accordingly. So it's a great way to be talking back and forth. So just a little bit of that one. And since I have this good picture here, just to go back to how important CB1 is, this type where there's 7 things going through, that's called a G protein coupled receptor. That's the most complex receptor in the human brain. And there have been 7 Nobel Prizes awarded for figuring out the different parts of the pathway of how a G protein coupled receptor gets activated and then transmits its signal down into the cell. There's a couple hundred of these that are known. A lot of them we don't even know what they do. We just know that they're in there because we can see them in the DNA, but we don't know their function. But they're incredibly complex. They're incredibly important in medicine because half of the drugs that are approved in the US are directed towards a G protein coupled receptor. So they're obviously very important medicine. So of this type of specialized, highly complex receptor, the number one type in the brain is the CB1 receptor. That's how important it is. Of this incredibly important drug class, by far the most of them is this endocannabinoid one that is incredibly delicate at listening to lipids and is in charge of balance. So that's why it's so easy to get so worked up about this, because yes, this used to be a backwater, but now it's the great white whale, I think. But I'm a little close maybe. Anyway, the last bit of we'll do on just the neuronal side. Good, doing good on time. GABA and your beautiful brain. So there are 3 types of neural functioning that I'd like to mention about how GABA helps. And I'll start with one that is probably the least well known, but it's the most classically of the endocannabinoid one. This is called depolarization-induced suppression of inhibition. So not the sexiest name, but what happens is that when a neuron like this gets activated, one of the things it does is change the electric potential across its membrane to much lower, so it's much harder to activate it. It basically shuts itself down a little bit and says, okay, I'm not going to fire again for so many milliseconds or seconds. What else that happens is, besides doing that, this cannabinoid goes back to the interneuron and tells it here to calm down your firing. And so this helps to alter how this is being affected. It's a way to help calm down the whole system. And one of the things that's really special about the endocannabinoids is that they can go backwards across the synaptic cleft. Remember, the classic way that neurotransmitters move is from the upstream synaptic cleft to the downstream. And for the longest time, they thought that was the only direction that things moved. And then it turns out that 2 types of molecules do that, only 2. One is nitric oxide, the gas that's in the air, turns out to be an important retrograde neurotransmitter signal. And the other is the endocannabinoids. So it also is a negative feedback loop that is incredibly important. It's one of the only ways the brain has to say to the upstream neuron, yes, I hear you, calm down, shut up, I got it. It's a way to help calm the brain. So that is DSI. This one is a little bit higher level, but the inhibitory effects of GABA also alter memory and learning as well, in a lot of different ways. In one mouse model of memory, the ability of serotonin receptors to regulate spatial memory depends on the CB1 and GABA. So something about remembering, then forgetting, not remembering too much. It's a balance. There's another study about the signaling of GABA accelerating the degradation in endocannabinoids and triggering a learning-induced metaplasticity. So really letting the brain alter itself and alter its connections of what it's doing. This also applies to stuff in things like your sense of smell and your sense of taste, which are very good at learning things and also very good at depressing signals. And it's doing this via endocannabinoids and GABA because it's such an important part of survival, is knowing that this thing smells good, but also starting to ignore the signal once you don't need it. Once you understand that sound is not a tiger, it's good to depress that, getting too worked up about that sound and wasting a fight or flight response on it. And so this means that the brain's ability to adapt and change comes at least partially via the endocannabinoids and GABA. And the last one I'll mention is one that's a pretty famous part of how the brain works, is called long-term depression. And its ability of your brain to reduce the activity of circuit after it's been activated too many times. Similar to the last one, it's don't get as affected by the signal. The And so this reduction can last for hours or longer. This is a more long-term kind of learning and learning to not get too activated by a stimulus that you no longer need to be activated by. And you can view that as a kind of downgrading of a signal. You need to be able, if you have your signal versus noise, if you go and you just keep increasing your signal, eventually you reach a point where your neurons can't signal anymore anyway. They only have so much power in them and you're stuck here and you have no modulation to tell if things are better or worse. The good spot is homeostasis here. And if your signal is getting too strong and starting to overwhelm you, sounds like, something like PTSD, this can help lower the signal so you're back here to where you can really have a better sense of whether the signal needs to be acknowledged or not. And so, and this one happens more via GABA and glutamate and dopamine. So anyway, the long-term impression is a really important part of this as well. So that covers the basics of the neurochemistry, and I have about 15 minutes left, so that's perfect. So anxiety and the positive allosteric modulation of GABA. So now we get to go into drugs, one of my favorite things. Most of these anti-anxiety drugs and things work via the GABA A receptor, and GABA is incredibly complex. There's all different types of GABA. It's affected in all these different ways, but in general, things are working around anxiety are working around GABA A. And so this includes the benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax, which I mentioned can be so helpful yet so dangerous. The barbiturates was kind of our first generation of depressants that we don't use very much anymore. This is what people are taking for fun in the 50s, but also getting addicted to. And then you have the Quaaludes. They also work via GABA. Quaaludes were the drug that everybody of a certain generation talks about with longing, and now everyone is hunting for and cannot find. And then the last one being alcohol, also works via GABA. And so what these do actually is positive allosteric modulation of GABA, which just means a signal boost. It means they don't actually bind to the regular binding spot of GABA. If this is the GABA molecule and the binding is up here, they might bind to a little pocket here, and this little pocket will alter the shape of the top receptor and make it either more open or less open to its regular binding partners. And so positive allosteric modulation means open up a little bit and bind a little bit more. So basically it's making these drugs in general make your GABA work a little bit stronger. So how does this relate to humans? Well, for one, benzos aren't good if you can avoid them. If you don't, they're not the end of the world, but they're a good thing to not have to take if you don't have to. And in one study, when patients received a medical cannabis prescription, half of them discontinued their benzo prescriptions, which is a pretty huge number. And it's something you hear about all the time. In the CBD world, whenever there are surveys of why people use CBD, anxiety is always in the top 3 list, along with pain and sleep. And in a rat study, they are very stressed out by being restrained, and so it makes their heart start to race. And it turns out even that is via the CB1 working via the GABA receptor. And so if you block their CB1 receptor from working, their hearts race even more. And so you can imagine if you can work with their CB1 receptors, you can make their hearts work less. So even the physiological reactions to fear and anxiety can be mediated by the endocannabinoid system and the GABA system. So this is just neurochemistry proving something that you hear all the time from people out in the world. And so the last point I think is really interesting is this review where it talks about how the cannabinoids from the plant might help in neurological diseases to help get your GABA functioning back and better. And I'll mention a couple of them a little farther on, but it is a really important part of this. The cannabinoids can help your brain restore its ability to calm itself down. And that's just such an important part of what we have going on here. So now GABA and the brain. So now we're going to get into the actual, the thick of how we help humans with this stuff. And the first thing I'll mention is autism. According to this brain imaging study, both CBD and CBDV the CBD varin. This is a close relative of CBD. It just has a slightly shorter tail. And it's the CBD varin, there's THC varin. These are great drugs in themselves. In general, they don't occur in high levels in the plant, so we haven't tested them as much and we don't use them as much. But I think in a sane future where people are mixing and matching their cannabinoids according to the best research and doctors can almost use them like a palette, CBDV is going to be a very important part of that. If you want to try THCV, that's generally in your cannabis that comes from South Africa, your Durbans. And some people, and THCV is somewhat psychoactive. And so it can give an interesting color to a cannabis plant. And so some people only seek out Durbans because of that THCV effect. Anyway, but CBDV is also a helpful one. And both of these can help autism via the GABA and the glutamate pathways. I will say, of all of the incredible stories I've heard on the road about people using cannabinoids for various things, autism is absolutely one of the biggest ones where people are like, wow, game changer. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, sometimes a couple of months of just 20 milligrams of CBD a day, but it can make a huge difference. No one knows exactly how, but it's wild. I actually have some stuff about that on my site at White Whale Creations about how people can use this. If you have any relatives who are curious about using cannabinoids for their health, I have these free primers at White Whale Creations, and it just walks you through the different products to try and how to try them, how to buy what you want, because especially for aging in general, the cannabinoids are amazing. That's what got me into this. And so I think it can do so much for people, especially over 50. I had one old farmer say to me, if you're not taking 50 milligrams of CBD every day, once you hit the age of 50, you're crazy. And I think it's true. The science really backs it up. They're so protective of the brain. I think of any of the daily supplements you can take, CBD is an amazing one to take. And feel free to shoot questions to me about any of that stuff. You can find me at lexpelger.com or whitewhaleCreations.com, but I'm happy to help, especially older people who need guidance on this stuff. It can make a huge difference. And it can make a difference for kids with autism. So it's also in Huntington's disease, which is, the classic genetic disease. It's really terrible one. Your brain starts to degrade around 40 and can really change your behavior. Huntington's disease itself alters the cannabinoid and GABA receptors. And in a mouse model of this disease, the levels of CB1 receptors plunge, or the level of CB1 receptors on GABA neurons plunges. So the brain's ability to rein itself in is very much altered. And there hasn't been a ton of work on Huntington's and phytocannabinoids, but what has been done is somewhat intriguing. As safe as these things are, they're often worth trying. And in schizophrenia. In this rat model of schizophrenia, CBD restored the cannabinoid and GABA signaling deficits. Again, schizophrenia is a really complicated one. You can definitely see THC making it worse. I think the evidence is pretty clear that kids smoking cannabis as adolescents leads to increased schizophrenia later on in their life. It's not a huge effect, but it's there. And it's one of the few negatives of cannabis that I think is that the prohibitionists have proved and are right about. And so, but that's not to say it's all bad. I think you hear a lot about people with schizophrenia using low levels of THC or high levels of CBD and being helped, but it's such an individual thing. You need to have somebody who knows about this stuff to work through it. But again, I think it's worth trying. And the last thing I want to say on the GABA side, on our red light, is GABA and pain, because there's probably more studies on GABA and pain than any other subject. But I'll just highlight one here in the interest of time. On any other subject, any other medical condition, GABA and pain. So this one I really like. This is out of Iran. If you have rats with arthritic knees, if you combine the therapies of stem cell injections and endurance training, which I think involves little treadmills, and ozone therapy, which I assume they send them to Los Angeles for, those three combined decrease pain via the CB1 and GABA receptors. So these alternative therapies seem to be working via our endocannabinoid system's ability to control GABA and calm things down. And that's actually true with a lot of alternative therapies. For instance, the runner's high and acupuncture. these are two famous things that we attributed to other things like endorphins for the runner's high. And we now know the endocannabinoids mediate at least some of that, maybe a lot of what makes that true. It could be that the runner's high is from endocannabinoids and acupuncture works at least partially via endocannabinoids, which I think is pretty fascinating, that these ancient technologies, these ancient ways of relating to ourselves are working through the endocannabinoid system. So that's GABA. Let's switch to glutamate. Okay, so for the template for this slide, it was for fun facts. Fun facts about Italy. Did you know that Italy has more World Heritage sites than any other country? Did you know that Dante used his book, The Inferno, to put a bunch of his political enemies in hell and torture them in very funny and fitting ways? It was Renaissance shitposting. See my TikTok for more. Seriously, Lex Pelgrin's books. It's like the only creative thing I have time for right now. Anyway, so glutamate in the brain, Alzheimer's disease. In a mouse model, if they took 3 months of PEA, which is an endocannabinoid-like molecule in your brain, it rescued cognitive deficits, it restrained neuroinflammation and oxidative stress, and it reduced the increase in hippocampal glutamate levels. So in your brain's memory center, it dialed down the glutamate and the excitation. And there was a similar study where PEA improved memory, learning, and depression by a rebalancing of the glutamate transmission. So keep your eye on PEA, by the way. Of all of the cannabinoid molecules that are getting studied, this one has more science on it than any of the others. This stuff started during the war when they noticed eggs kept kids healthier, and turns out PEA was a thing in eggs. PEA works via nuclear receptors on the surface of cells. So the PEA actually changes genetic transcription, and it seems to do that very much involved with inflammatory cytokines and things like that. So PEA, which is a molecule in your brains, probably in every single cell in your body, is incredibly safe. You can buy it on Amazon, though I'd recommend getting it from something better than just a powder you find from Left Mode. But it could be the supplement that changes everything. CBD is the first one to try, but if you want to try an everyday supplement, PEA is the next one to try. This is an amazing molecule. So on to autism again. It's a brain study imaging showing how CBD helped via GABA and glutamate pathways. Is this the same one as before? It is the same one as before. It's all embarrassing. So, but in depression, the antidepressant effects of CBD in mice seem to be mediated not only by serotonin signaling, but also by glutamate signaling. And so that's what's crazy about CBD and THC is that, CBD has over like 65 different targets in the body. Most drugs hit like 1 or 2 things. CBD and THC are just this Swiss Army knife of things that it gets done. And so CBD works probably for depression via serotonin and glutamate, which is pretty interesting. For another brain disease, this is a study on multiple sclerosis, and in a mouse model of MS, those who didn't have CB1 receptors had a worse disease progression by a number of factors. And so it seems like CB1's regulation of glutamate transmission, it helps because it lowers that excessive synaptic transmission, the overexcitation, the signaling too much that's caused by glutamate, and is a major part of what causes the damage from this disease. Another aside, if you know anyone with MS, this is the most studied disease where we have clinical evidence and anecdotal evidence saying that it's imperative to try phytocannabinoids. Try lots of CBD, try small amounts of THC in the beginning. This makes a huge difference for people because MS is both a neurodegenerative disease. It's also an autoimmune disease, and it's where the brain is attacking its own myelin sheaths. But neurodegeneration and autoimmune disorders are 2 of the most obvious things that the cannabinoids do, and MS sits at the nexus of both of them. So for people with MS, try the phytocannabinoids for sure. And this is a huge one. This could have been its own slide, but I knew I was going to be right on time, and I am, which is good. But neuroprotection, in the immune cells of the brain, the microglial cells, CBD inhibited glutamate's ability to increase inflammation. And that's a big part of what the endocannabinoid system does, is keep inflammation down. PEA also helps with nerve injuries. And you see in all these different ways in how CBD and the endocannabinoids help with neuroprotection. And the last really big one is schizophrenia and psychosis again. And this is one where CBD increased the levels of glutamate in the hippocampus and significantly decreased symptom severity. And so you have a lot of mixed studies on CBD and schizophrenia and how this stuff works. But, you know, for the people in this study, which is a fair size study, I don't have the exact number, a single dose of 600 milligrams of CBD helped for the next day or two. And you hear enough from people that it's worth trying. So that is where, the last thing I want to mention is epilepsy and seizures. But there's so much about epilepsy and seizures, and so much has been written about that. And it's obvious that the ability of the endocannabinoid system to control glutamate and inhibit that is going to be key to why CBD just helps rescue kids from severe epilepsy. So we will end it here on that, and happy to take any questions. Yeah, so thanks for listening.
Thank you, Lex. And thank you for finishing right on time. These last few minutes, everyone, is reserved specifically for questions and answers. If you'd like to type them in the chat, we can go ahead and relay them to Lex. Yeah, man. Personally, though, I really love when you talk about actually using cannabinoids for different conditions. The fact that you post guidance on White Whale Creations, it's really amazing. Could you elaborate more about the stories you heard about cannabinoids and autism? I think you talked about specifically CBD variant, right?
Yes, that is definitely one to try. The stories I've heard the most, because it's the most out there, is CBD. And it seems like it's not often that people study full spectrum hemp extracts. Usually they're studying isolated CBD because they don't want to have all that messy stuff in kids and they don't know what's going on. But there's been so much studies of autism that there have been some extract studies, and full spectrum hemp extracts or cannabis extracts high in CBD, very low in THC, do better than isolated CBD, even when there's much less CBD in there. I would guess that those microdoses of THC is helping to grow new brain pathways, new brain cells. We don't know exactly how it's working, but I do think a full spectrum extract is a good idea, because you get all those other minor cannabinoids in there. You get the terpenes, you get the fatty acids from the plant, which I think oftentimes the fatty acids are a huge help on their own, because the same fatty acids that the plant uses to make the phytocannabinoids in the plant, those fatty acids are the exact same ones that we use to make the endocannabinoids in ourselves. And even though they look like very different molecules, they're made from the same building blocks and they work on the same receptors in the brain. And so the idea of people just drinking, juicing the hemp plant and drinking the juice, it could be that those fatty acids are a big part of why that helps. And by the way, that's an amazing thing for gut health. And that can be a healthy thing for kids with autism, because guts are such a key part of this, is juicing raw hemp or raw cannabis. And drinking that juice, that can be a great way to start, because there's absolutely no psychoactive effect. But for kids with autism, just start low. Just start with low levels of CBD rich hemp extracts and slowly increase to not so high a dose, 20, 30 milligrams a day, and just let it ride for a couple of weeks, couple of months it can take. The reason I care so much about this one is 2 nephews of mine, and their lives have been completely changed. I mean, completely, to me, perhaps not leaving the house to, now going to college. I mean, it's amazing. And so and after that, it's worth experimenting with CBDV and PEA and things like that. And parents with kids with autism are used to experimenting. And so there's a lot of options there to just mix in different cannabinoids every couple of weeks and see if you notice any changes. So yeah, that's what I'd say on the autism side.
That's awesome. And I got to
And
get you back to talk about seizures as well. That's another great uh, field of study for cannabinoids. But we've
yeah,
got a
yeah.
ton of
Oh,
questions
you
in the chat now.
we
So
do. Okay, I can
let's,
see him. Okay, I can hit him quick because I know we
yeah,
have
go
like
ahead.
10 minutes. Okay, what dose of PA is a daily supplement? Um, Shoot, I forget actually. And one of the companies that I consult for does it. I would recommend CV Sciences. I think they make really quality products. Just to throw out a company you can trust, they make great products and they're third party tested. So they have a defense product that has, what is it? It's higher levels than CBD. I think it's more like 50 to 100 to 200 milligrams a day. But with CBD and PEA, you really can't go too high. I mean, what most vendors are going to have in their product is probably about the right amount, but they're both so incredibly safe. You need to take thousands of milligrams to get to any kind of negative effects usually, and then it's just like gut upset and stuff like that. You just dial it back down. Do liver toxicity concerns me about CBD, or is that propaganda from the NIDA? I mean, it's definitely there. There's a signal there. This isn't completely being made up, but also, you're not seeing the effects from it. So that it is a slight drag on the liver. I would believe, just like it's a slight drag on fertility and the reproductive system and probably even prenatal health. I wouldn't recommend taking CBD unless it's helpful for your guts, for nausea and things like that. So yeah, liver toxicity, no, it doesn't. The doctors that I know who are into this stuff are not really concerned about it. And I see the studies and it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of negativity there, but as far as life goes, it doesn't seem like that much. But yeah, the things the FDA are holding it up on really is the liver and reproductive health. And they're right, there's not enough evidence to say it's safe because nothing's ever safe in this world. So how can a consumer verify if a PEA product is authentic? Really the same for every product. They have to have third-party testing by batch. If they just say we do third-party testing, you don't believe. They need to have a system where they have a certain batch produced on a certain date and they show the third-party test results. That is still not a perfect system because you're paying the lab to do the work. They don't want to, give you a gotcha, but still, it's a better system. If companies set up like that, that's your best branded, best idea of trust. People sounding good just doesn't go far enough. Sometimes even having a good heart for this makes it worse because you don't actually know what you're doing. But you have a really good heart about it, so it sounds good. Like trying to make a CBD beverage. They're incredibly difficult to make. You really have to be a fine chemist to get stuff in. So third-party testing is really the only way to be sure of what you're getting, or do it yourself. If you can grow hemp plants or cannabis plants, they're not that hard. And you can juice them yourself and process them yourself. I'm not doing it yet, but I would like to. Have you seen any notable studies on CBDA? Yes, though it's kind of, I think I have every study ever done. If anybody needs data, I have all the data collected in files organized by organ. And so and I looked up CBDA specifically because I wanted to write a chapter in my book about it. There's only like 100 or 200 studies about CBD acid. And so if people don't know the acid versions, any of these that end with an A, like CBD acid, that's the raw version of the molecule in the plant. And so the thing about THC acid, CBD acid is it doesn't look like they cross the blood-brain barrier, so they can't get you high. That's why you can't eat a cannabis plant and get high. Usually, yeah, you hear stories, but the way to change a acid version to a non-acid version is by heating it. And so that's why you have to smoke your pot. As soon as your flame touches it, all that THC acid and CBD acid become THC and CBD. Or you can bake it for 10 minutes in the oven, and that's how you convert them as well. It's called decarboxylation, technically, but really it just means taking off the acid one. That being said, CBD acid is amazing. It's why you should juice the cannabis plant and drink the juice. CBD acid seems to work via the COX pathways, which is the same way that your pain reliever, fever relievers work on. And yeah, I think inflammation and gut health, it just is just amazing. So there are products out there that combine CBD and CBD acid. They're a great combination. I would always try a CBD product first to see if it's just, and then add a CBD acid at one end later and see if it makes a difference or not. For every phytocannabinoid, it might help you, it might not. And it takes some experimentation to figure out, add it in for 2 weeks. Does it work? Take it out again. But yeah, if you want any of these studies, feel free to email me. My email's not on here, but it's my last name, pelger@gmail.com. You can find it on my websites there as well. I'm easy to find. And I'm happy to send these data files to anybody that wants them on pretty much any disease you've ever heard of. I'll send you everything that I have on that. And with my newsletter that I've been doing, collecting the science one for 3 or 4 years now, I haven't missed anything in the last 3 or 4 years. So all the reviews of the latest stuff, science and what's come out recently, I have. It's just, I might have some holes from like the 1980s and 1990s. Recent quick cannabis, struggle with memory. So you quit cannabis and got some negative effects. Yeah, there's withdrawal symptoms with cannabis, and especially sometimes people just need cannabis because it actually is kind of a supplement medicine for their mental health, and sometimes you're going through withdrawal effects. I think supplementing with CBD, I think it's a good idea to take a break, and I think supplementing with CBD could help. When you see all these studies about how to get over cannabis use disorder, which is a real thing, but also is overdiagnosed. Yeah, cannabis use disorder use small levels of cannabinoids. They give them like small levels of synthetic cannabinoids, or a vape pen with like very low levels of THC. And it is a little bit about finding that balance. Maybe you can get by with full spectrum hemp extracts. They have the THC in there, and that might be a way to help. That might be enough to help bring the balance back. So yeah, I think supplementing with a full spectrum hemp extract would be a great way to start. And recover your brain from overuse of cannabis. It happens. Yeah. I mean, you do depress your receptor levels like you do with anything. And it can take a while for them to grow back, but it's not forever. It's usually a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months from, the stories and the science. But it's not like I'm one who can preach self-control that well, but if you can give yourself a couple of months, even with just CBD and some other non-psychoactive cannabinoids, it might be interesting to see how that goes. You might find your balance again. And by the way, breath work is a way to get high and not actually use a drug. And it seems to activate the endocannabinoid system and things like that. Long-term use of CBD as a food supplement or a prescription drug under control of doctors and pharmacists. Oh, good legal question. Use CBD in the food industry as a marketing tool that exposes people to non-therapeutic doses of CBD and bring potential long-term harm. That is excellent thinking. My last boss, who is a genius to follow, Dr. Duffy Mackay, you can find him on LinkedIn. That was one of the main points he made. And he thought that it was, he studied closely FDA, and he said that the FDA has a legitimate concern about putting CBD into food willy-nilly. And where kids can eat it a lot easier and everything like that, because you could have your CBD gummy in the morning, and then your CBD cappuccino, and then your CBD beef jerky, and then your CBD ice cream that night, like the hungry caterpillar. And all of a sudden you accidentally took in 1,500 milligrams of CBD that day. In extreme cases, you eat the entire bag with CBD chips. And that levels, they can start to cause stomach upset. And it's just, most drugs aren't great at huge levels, and CBD is probably the same. It's not, luckily, pretty much all the harms of CBD are transient and will go away. But if you don't know you're taking it and you're just eating that bag of chips every night, you could be dosing yourself at a lot higher levels than you realize. And so I think the best bet of how this could be regulated, and probably what makes the most sense, is don't allow it to be willy-nilly in foods, and to have it be a dietary supplement that stays in the labeled aisle with testing and stuff. Especially because adding it, you can add it to food and it's not too hard to do, but adding it to liquids is usually a waste of time. Most people, it's a marketing gimmick. So yeah, you're right. It's a marketing tool, and it is reasonable fear of the FDA to allow it into the ecosystem completely. They also don't think it should be allowed anywhere because it's technically a drug called Epidiolex, isolated CBD. That was the law with the FDA is it was looked at as a drug before it hit the market as a plant extract. And so they're saying that every CBD supplement in the US is illegal. And they're just refusing to take another step forward without Congress. It's really a maddening situation that's causing the entire industry to shed workers and money because they can't get into the big stores, and it's a sad situation. And now they're hitting recession like everyone else, and so CBD industry is not doing so well. So it's unfortunate that the FDA has taken such a strict view when Epidiolex is usually isolated CBD given it hundreds of thousands of milligrams to very sick children, and dietary supplements of CBD give people, maybe max 50 or 100 milligrams of CBD. It's really in the context of a full plant extract, it really shouldn't be seen as the same thing. But it's the FDA; they can do what they want, unfortunately. Hey, a raw cannabis juice that gets you high. All right, happy to try it for sure. Yeah, I mean, my best friend and editor, he says he eats it and he gets high. There's all this controversy about whether it can be activated in your stomach. THC acid can become THC, and the scientists I like pretty definitively say it's no, but it's a thing that keeps going around. And maybe it happens in certain people with weird stomachs, like the Rasputins of the world. Rasputin, the poison didn't work on him because he was such an alcoholic that he didn't have any bile in his stomach, and the poison couldn't convert into the actual poison. So the fact that some people have some kind of oddity in their system that allows them to convert or decarboxylate the THC acid and get high, well, just lucky for them. But yeah, it could happen to some people. And the brand recommendation for full spectrum hemp extracts, CV Sciences is the company, and they make Plus CBD oil. And I consult for them, and I knew them before, and I know they make a good quality product, and they have a PEA product, which is hard to find, unfortunately, like a well-made one. I would recommend them. And so, I think that's the end of the questions that we have, and with 5 minutes left. So I think that's about right.
Yeah, I think this is a great time to wrap it up. Everyone, don't forget to check out White Whale Creations. And thank you so much, Lex, for all your sharing the information that we can use in our own lives. The recording of this webinar will be up on the CAN YouTube channel as soon as it's ready. And again, thank you so much, Lex.
Yeah, no problem. And someone asked again about the company. It's CV Sciences, and they make Plus CBD. And maybe the last plug I'll make besides my Cannabinoids and People newsletter is, my books are online for free. Actually, you don't have to pay for them. I'm trying to get them bound. It might even be arriving tonight, the first bound copy since my first printing 5 years ago before I had kids. CV Sciences. And so, at lexpelger.com, you can see some graphic novels on the endocannabinoid system. So there's my last pitch. And thank you so much for everybody coming, and feel free to reach out about questions or for more data or science or to learn more about the endocannabinoid system. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Don't forget to check out Journal Club next, the last Thursday of every month. The next one will be on July 28th, just so keep an eye out for that. And again, thank you so much for attending. Take care, everyone.